So I moved up to Scotland 8 years ago now. We've set up our first aid training business, and of course you set up your business and immediately you get phone calls from people going, can we have a first aid course? And we were getting phone calls from nurseries, and they were asking the question, we're a nursery, we need a first aid course, can you come and run that course for us? And I was thinking, oh well, there must be somewhere written down where I can find out what sort of training they need and all this sort of thing, and I couldn't find the information. So I went to the Care Inspectorate. It seemed like the logical place to go to ask the question. You know, I want to do some training for people in nurseries, looking after wee kiddies. What would you recommend I teach? What do people need? And of course, then the whole sort of can of worms opens up. Where actually in Scotland there is no mandatory training required in the paediatric sort of sector. So that's the starting point for all this. So we've been working quite a lot over the last few years, trying to figure out what is best, what is the industry standard, because there really isn't an industry standard in Scotland, whereas in England it's very, very different, it's very regulated. So just talking to the Care Inspectorate, what they would say is a course can't be recommended, so a first aid course in the sector can't be recommended, but childcare staff need the skills, knowledge and ability to do their job. And so that's quite a generic statement. Each provider has to justify this for themselves, hence there is no prescription about what first aid course is required and how often it needs to be revalidated. So that's the Care Inspectorate's line on paediatric first aid in Scotland for sort of kiddie centres, nurseries, kindergartens, home childcare providers in the sector. And so they gave me all this information. I thought, well, that can't be right, I'm not happy with that. And so I then got in touch with the government. I said, come on, you must be something more than this. So this was in preparation of the conference we did a couple of years ago in Dunfermline for those people who were there, and I talked a bit about this then. We wrote to the Minister, we did a freedom of information request, and they came back and they said to us, well look, 93% of all childcare services have one or more members of staff with a current accredited paediatric first aid and children's certificate. And you sort of read that statement and you sort of think, well, if you work in the sector, that statement doesn't make any sense. But actually, it's almost like a political statement, because if you're just a member of the general public looking at that, you sort of think, well, that sounds pretty good. So when I went back to them and said, well, I'm not sure that's quite right, I don't quite understand how you've written those words, because, so of the 3,000 services that there are, 97% have someone available on time, at all times with children. And well, I sort of knew that was true anecdotally, because we work with a lot of nurseries and we do contracts for some nurseries and actually do their training. So we knew these figures weren't correct. And when I went back to the Minister and asked, what do you mean by current? So I guess in our sector, we know by current we kind of mean in the last 3 years. They didn't really have a definition of what current meant. Current could mean you did the training 20 years ago and you had a certificate, and that was current. So, you know, that's what they felt. What does accredited mean? And again, now we're into this regulated, unregulated, but actually for the government, they didn't really have a definition of what they meant by an accredited certificate, which seemed very strange. And then they're using statements like this, so a paediatric first aid certificate or a first aid for children certificate, and I sort of said, well, I've never heard of a first aid for children certificate. I've heard of paediatric first aid, and actually, when we pulled them down and said, look, show us your statistics, how do you generate that figure? They couldn't give us an answer as to how they generated that figure. And when we went back to them, they actually said, okay, so what's happened is we've got figures from 2014, 2015, 2016, we've sort of amalgamated them all together, and we've sort of boxed and copped it a bit, and actually I'm not going to say they made it up, but you can get a feel for it, I guess. So as this was happening, we kind of thought, well, if we're going to go and talk to the Minister, we need some evidence, because this is what they think. So what we did is we did a freedom of information request for the 32 Scottish local authorities about chatting to the Care Inspectorate, and we've challenged the figures, we've given them this data, and they've agreed their figures were not quite correct. And so in 2017, so this is after the last conference, we worked with the Care Inspectorate to rewrite the questions they use in their annual survey. So the Care Inspectorate sends essentially a big form to all of the childcare providers, so 3,000 200, 300 establishments in Scotland every year, and they have to tick the form to go, yes, we've got qualified staff, yes, we do this, yes, we do that, yes, we do. So we worked with the Care Inspectorate to rewrite their questions on first aid to make them a bit more meaningful. So, how many members of staff do you have on site with a 12-hour paediatric first aid certificate, rather than all this accredited, regulated, all those sorts of ways, so a bit more structure in there. And so that happened in 2017, so those questions went into the 2018 survey to all the childcare establishments. And so the results from 2018, we got the raw data back, and it turns out 10% of all sort of nursery, kindergarten settings in Scotland have no one on site with a first aid qualification. And when the raw data came back, and obviously we've been working quite a lot with the Care Inspectorate, so we've built quite a good relationship, so they let us have the raw data. I was sitting on my chair thinking, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. So the data from the Care Inspectorate showed 25% of settings had no one with paediatric first aid training. And that actually backed up the data we got from the local authorities quite nicely. So that was not unexpected. Only 18% of settings have staff with a 2-day paediatric 12-hour, classic paediatric first aid qualification on site. So if you want to know what the current situation in Scotland is, well, that's it. We got those figures off the Care Inspectorate July 2018. So, 7-8 months ago now. So we got these figures, and I got back in touch with the Minister. I said, well, here's the evidence now, because you didn't believe me before, but this is from the Care Inspectorate. This is the evidence. And they didn't reply. And then we went back to them, they didn't reply. And 10 days ago, we got a reply from the Minister. So literally, we've just, So in the meantime, what's happened is the HSE brought out their new case study guidance documents. And so, which said best practice and current guidance is earlier providers need an appropriate number of staff on site with a 12-hour paediatric first aid qualification. So in the meantime, what was happening, the HSE came up their new document, all those cases, people read it, there's 8 or 9 case studies in there, and one of the case studies was a nursery setting and what sort of qualifications should you have in a nursery setting. So this is the information the HSE came out with, sort of alongside what we were doing. So anyway, July 2018, wrote to the Minister, gave her all of the data, and we said, what we're going to do now, because this is the evidence that you need. And 7 months later, we got a reply. Now, we've not been doing nothing for 7 months. We've been knocking on the door, phoning them up, writing them letters, talking to people, and it's just been quite frustrating. This is what they came back with last week. Which is kind of like the figures they were giving us back in 2016. So I've gone back to them already, clearly, and said, very interesting data. So why have you not commented on the data I sent you? Why have you just sent this new figure that actually, it's not about who's on site with a qualification, it's just who you've got on staff. It's not splitting out adult and child first aid. So they've gone back to their old ways, and we haven't had a reply from them clearly yet. It's only been 10 days, but so in that 3-year process that we're going through, we've not really moved forward. It's really frustrating. I will use polite words. It's been quite a frustrating process, and that's with us putting a lot of energy in and knocking on doors and talking to people and being nice to people and trying to work with the sector. The next statement, so I've got a letter the Minister's written all this stuff, I can give you that afterwards if you want it. But so the next thing, remember what was the HSE said as guidance for paediatric settings? So what was the Minister's reply to that? So I don't need to say very much there. So basically the Minister has said, yeah, it's nice to have the HSE and it's great to have their guidance, but it's not relevant in Scotland.
Is it the same Minister?
Yeah, it's the same Minister. You've got lots of paediatric settings, earlier childcare settings. What would you require staff at those settings to have? And they said, well, a third of the local authorities came back and said, well, as long as someone's got an emergency first aid at work ticket or a first aid at work ticket, that's fine for working in a nursery. So that's really interesting, isn't it? For those of us who work in the sector, only 10% require a 2-day, 12-hour course. So imagine that for those folks who come from England. You know, imagine that. Only 25% of local authorities require a 6-hour course, and across the local authorities, the courses they recommended vary greatly in numbers of hours. So, you know, I can't remember doing a 7.5-hour accredited course before, but you know, sure it happens. And in some of the statements coming back from the local authorities, they were saying that we require our providers to do a 2-day first aid for childcare course, or a HSE approved. This is in like 2016. So again, for those of us working in the sector, these statements just don't add up. So we had all this data, we had all this information, and we went to meet the minister, and we